If someone would have told me years ago that I would one day be speaking to corporations, universities, organizations, and communities about leadership, hope, and empowerment, I probably would have laughed or cried or both, depending on the day, because the person I was back then could not have imagined the life that I'm living now, or the work that I'd eventually be called to do. And before I go any further, I want to address something that almost everyone assumes about my story. Most people think that it begins on the day that I became paralyzed due to domestic violence. But that moment, as life-altering as it wasn't the beginning. It was only one chapter. The real beginning came much later in the quiet collapse of my life. But before I share that, I want to acknowledge something that you've probably already noticed. I didn't dress up for this video. No makeup, no staging, no polished backdrop. This is my garden here in Tanzania, and that's intentional. My work is trauma-aware leadership, the kind that requires presence, honesty, and humanity. So I show up exactly as I am, the same way I show up for organizations, universities, retreats, and communities all over the world. My real story began nearly 18 years after I got paralyzed, when everything in my life was collapsing all at the same time. My mental health was unraveling, my finances were gone, my daughters weren't with me, and I was living in a home that I was about to lose to foreclosure. I had nothing, no identity, no stability, and no emotional safety. And in the middle of the collapse, I was forced to ask myself the question that would ultimately change everything in my life. And that was, what can I do right now with what I have? That question became my lifeline. The first breath out of a season that could have taken me under. At a time when I felt that I had nothing left, I made a decision that didn't make sense even to me. I decided I was going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in my wheelchair, not because I needed the world to witness it or because I needed to beat the odds, but because I needed to prove to myself that my story wasn't over. I needed to reclaim my life after battling suicidal ideation and PTSD for years, and after losing really close friends to suicide. That climb became the catalyst. It was the moment that I realized that if I was going to live, I had to live with intention. I didn't climb that mountain alone, and I didn't rebuild my life alone either. God placed people in my path who were living examples of what real leadership were. They were courageous, compassionate, and faithful. One of those people is Joy McGlamory, my co-founder. On Kilimanjaro, there's actual footage, video footage of Joey and our small team all holding one single rope that was attached to my wheelchair. That rope wasn't just a safety line. It was leadership in its purest form. They were pulling me forward, but not dragging me, controlling me, or carrying me because they believed I was incapable. They held that rope because they believed in where we all were going together. And that moment taught me something I had spent my whole life missing. Strength isn't doing everything alone. Strength is allowing people to hold the rope when you're climbing something bigger than yourself. When I first began building my businesses in the US and in Tanzania, that rope became more than just a memory. It became the blueprint for how I lead, with trust, safety, and shared purpose. Teams don't grow through fear. Organizations don't rise through intimidation. People don't thrive when they're terrified of making a mistake. But in Tanzania's tourism industry, especially among porters, fear is the norm. Porters are some of the hardest working, lowest paid people in the entire country. Most have spent their lives believing, if I mess up, I'm going to get fired. If I speak up, they're going to replace me. And if I go against what a customer says, even in the name of safety, I'm going to lose my livelihood. That fear sits in the nervous system. It shuts down communication, confidence, and creativity. When we launched our company in Tanzania, we made a decision to lead differently. We built a culture of psychological safety where mistakes aren't punishable, they're teachable. Where communication isn't a threat, it's a tool for connection. And where people aren't disposable, they're valued. And that one shift, just like the rope on Kilimanjaro, changed everything for our businesses. Our teams began to flourish. Men who had lived their whole life here in Tanzania in survival mode, they started getting sober. They started planning for their futures, taking ownership, and finding their voices. They weren't just working for the company, they were helping us build it. Because when people feel safe, they rise. And when people feel trusted, they grow. And when they feel supported, they become leaders. I've built everything in my life from nothing. My companies, my nonprofit work, my leadership, my relationships, my healing, my faith. All of it was built from the ground up, from brokenness, resilience, from grace, and from asking that one question again and again. What can we do right now with what we have? Today, I teach trauma-aware leadership, resilience under pressure, identity transformation, and the mental shifts that change everything. I teach people how to regulate under pressure, how to communicate without reactivity, build psychologically safe cultures, and lead from clarity instead of fear, navigate with compassion, and move out of survival mode into grounded, intentional action. None of this is from theory, but from lived experience, neuroscience, and faith. If my story resonates with you, if your people need a message rooted in truth, humanity, and real hope, I would be honored to support your company, organization, your students, or your community. Transformation doesn't happen in perfect moments. It happens in the messy middle. When we stop asking, why me? And start asking, what can we do right now with what we have? Thank you.